We're going to discuss all of this. Let me now introduce you to the keynote speaker, a man I have great respect for, Warwick Bartlett, a true veteran in the industry. He understands the ins and outs, and there is very little that he can talk about. He is a man of a very high level of integrity and always willing to be available and share his thoughts around whatever the subject might be. Specifically, of course, around the industry, and its very, very specific issues. And he will share some of that. He has advised numerous governments. He runs a consultancy that he set up. I believe it's quite impactful in the sports betting side of the business, as global betting and gaming consultants. And I believe that what he is going to tell us today will reinforce that image that he already has with many of us around the industry. Warwick, I'll hand it over to you. Looking forward to hear from you.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today. The title of my speech is Tension Between the US and China and Will It Affect the Gambling Industry? But we're also obviously going to talk about COVID-19, the devastating effect that has had on the land-based business, and hopefully we can point to the future as to how long it's going to take to recover. So this tension that exists today, in actual fact, was predicted 12 years ago by Niall Ferguson, the professor of financial history at Harvard University. In the final chapter of his book, The Ascent of Money, and that's the cover of the book, he referred to the symbiotic trading relationship between China and the US. And 12 years ago, China had acquired something like $1 trillion of US debt. And that enabled the US government to finance its obligations. And the deal was contingent on the US to allow one-way free trade with China. And the benefit of that was the US consumer benefited from cheaper goods, causing US inflation to fall, and companies have benefited from outsourcing their manufacturing to China. But maintaining high prices, leading to higher profits. But this arrangement was untenable because US manufacturing base was eroded, and that, as it has in the UK and Europe, and people lost their jobs. And if you lose your job, cheap goods are less appealing. Consequently, the unemployed factory worker in Ohio voted for Donald Trump, who promised change. And the result now is that we have growing tension between these two great superpowers, China and the USA. And the question is really, how will it resolve itself and what effect will it have on gambling? If the US and Europe chooses to redress this trade balance through tariffs and onshoring, then the cost to consumers will rise, leaving less to spend on non-essentials, and that includes gambling. So going forward, it does seem that the consumer is going to feel pinched, life is going to be difficult, and COVID-19 has accelerated the problem between the US and China. And the view of China from the West is somewhat different to what it was in 2018. And the US being the US, they will want something to pay, somebody to pay for what has happened. And of course, we have further uncertainty with the US presidential election. And the odds when I wrote this speech were Biden was 8-15, Trump was 2-1. If anything, I think that Trump has probably gone out in the betting since then, and Biden has shortened. What difference the election will make is unclear. I imagine that Biden, who is a politician, will be more diplomatic in his approach than Donald Trump. How that will manifest itself, I have no idea. But COVID-19 has been a major issue for gambling companies. We've seen the cancellation of sports, casinos closing, travel restrictions cutting supply to resort casinos, and the only bright spot has been internet casino, internet lottery, and poker. But the data shows that when things do start to open up, the recovery is quite V-shaped. And here we see the Chinese lottery from June 19 to July 2020. And this is a classic V-shaped recovery, a huge plunge as COVID-19 started to ravage the people in China. But then when things started to get back to normal, the recovery is quite profound. In the UK, these are figures from the UK Gambling Commission. We see that in March, the Cheltenham horse racing festival was allowed to go ahead. Some 80,000 spectators turn up every year. The betting market is very strong. It's one of the most prolific betting markets in the UK on horse racing. But it was alleged that this festival going ahead, along with some important Champions League soccer matches, did cause the virus to spread. The government reacted quickly. They locked down all of the sports. And there you see in April here, quite a substantial drop. But then people started to go online and they started to engage in slots. Poker revitalized itself, starting to get back to how it was. And then when the sport started to open up in June and July, things started to really pick up. And on this slide, we see UK iGaming active accounts during COVID-19 lockdown. And it's pretty good, actually. The internet is definitely the place where the gambling companies need to be. So how quickly will we recover from COVID-19? And the only reference point that I have is the state of Nevada looking back to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And what we see here is the commercial casino gross gaming yield from 2006 to 2020. And if you look at the 2006-07 here, this was when it reached a peak of all time. Came off a little bit in 2007-08, and in 2008-09, quite a substantial drop, falling further in 2009-10 before a gradual recovery started to take place. But the interesting thing here is that after 12 years, 8 years, we're still not back to where we were in 2007. But that's only one side of the story, because if we combine food, hospitality, entertainment, what we see here is a peak in 2007 and 8, and of course the drop 2008-9, and then we see a steady climb all the way up to 2017-18. So what was going on here? Well, the operators in Las Vegas realized that there was a changing taste in the pattern of spending amongst millennials. They were less interested in gambling, more interested in food, beverage, entertainment, exhibitions, conferences. And so the operators in Las Vegas completely readjusted their business model, had to invest substantially in their properties, but it certainly paid off. The problem, of course, is that the profitability from entertainment, food and beverage is much less than it is from gambling. So substantial investment, lower return, but they're still back in the market. And Las Vegas has become the party center of the world. And I think we should give them some kudos there. They've done an absolutely great job. So the question really is this time different? The COVID-19 recession, is it going to be different to the financial recession of 2008-9? A recent survey by McKinsey found that 80% of Americans are still anxious about dining out. And if they're anxious about that, they're going to be anxious about going to the casino, standing in a slot hall, bingo club or betting shop, assuming, of course, they do all reopen. And if we listen to the eminent economist Carmen Reinhardt said on September the 17th, after the 2008-9 crisis, she said, "I knew what to expect, but here we are in a situation that is very different. Everything depends on how quickly there will be a vaccine." She went on to say the real recovery, how long it will take for the average person to recover the income they had before the crisis, the GDP per capita, this will take at least 5 years. And another good reference point which confirms that is Jay Powell from the Federal Reserve, who said interest rates will be held at 0 until 2023. I think what that means is that he's saying the bottom of the current cycle will be 2023, but that could be open to revision. It could go on for longer. Nevertheless, what we do see in the here and now today is significant pent-up demand when things do get back to normal. Looking here at US venues after reopening, and we see that Louisiana gaming machines in truck stops, bars and racinos were up 14.2% year on year. South Dakota casinos up 4.1%. Illinois gaming machines 23%. And Ohio casinos were up 22% year on year, and the gaming machines in racinos up 3.5%. So people have been locked away, they've been saving money, and when things start to open, they rush out and they start to enjoy themselves again. And one would hope that that is something that's going to happen in the not too distant future. Looking ahead, unfortunately, I have to be a little bit gloomy because nation states are going to need to raise taxes to finance all the schemes that were introduced to save companies and to furlough people that were laid off. And this has to be paid for. As Margaret Thatcher once said, pennies don't fall from heaven, they're earned here on earth. And so taxes will need to be raised. And the problem as far as the gambling industry is concerned is that no politician has ever lost his job or a vote, come to that, by increasing the taxes on gambling. So I suspect across the board, we are going to see some tax increases in the future. But it's not all downside, because countries that previously had never considered having a gambling policy or to regulate gambling will now consider to do so. More states in the US will start to regulate. I expect Latin American states to regulate, and I think that India will also. And I also think over the next 10-year period, we'll see some movement in China, but I'll come on to that later. So what are the opportunities going forward? Well, with everybody working from home, and as Harman has said, we've all had to adjust our lives so extensively. What is likely to happen is that property prices and values are going to fall. We've already seen it in the City of London, and that provides a lot of opportunities for people on the land-based sector to find better positions at cheaper prices. There's also going to be opportunities in mergers and acquisitions. As far as the internet is concerned, land-based businesses that don't have an internet solution have really been caught out during this epidemic. And I think that those that haven't need to get online as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of people here at G2E Asia that can help them with that. Then we come to the thorny problem of the US licenses in Macau. Now, there's a tender process has to take place, and each of the operators must submit a tender if they're going to get a license going forward. I would say, if you asked me to bet on this, I would say that the American licenses, in spite of the tension that exists between the United States and China, I would say that they would have their licenses. And the reason I say that is that not to grant them would be an act of self-harm on the part of the Macau and Beijing government. They've invested so much money and they have brought Las Vegas to Macau, and the end result is that what they've produced has been incredible. The size of the operation, the bedrooms per property, the standard of finish, the levels of customer service, the probity in which the way that they are run is top class. And I would go so far as to say that it would be self-harm if they were not allowed to continue. And it's a bit like a lottery license to an operator. It's very rare that the incumbent is not renewed on a lottery, because there are so many risks involved of someone else taking over, and no politician wishes to take that risk. And I think the same applies here. But we do have to ask the question, what could go wrong? And tension between the China and the US is likely to increase. And the reason for that is China's GDP is scheduled to overtake the US by 2030, or at least draw level to it. Now, if that happens, and there's a very good chance it will happen, because China's come out of COVID-19 in a much better position than the rest of the world. And so their GDP is likely to grow at a much faster rate. And therefore tensions are likely to rise, because when one superpower feels that another superpower is drawing close, and there is inevitable tension. And we saw this with the British Empire and all the previous empires prior. And it's not really very helpful when you read things like this. US President Donald Trump signaled a further deterioration of his relationship with China over the coronavirus outbreak, saying he has no interest in speaking to President Xi right now, and going so far as to suggest he could even cut ties with the world's second largest economy. I would say that last phrase is wishful thinking, because US manufacturing, European manufacturing is so intertwined with Chinese production. This is no easy task. But you have to ask the question, as the tensions rise, and as Harman said today, there was a development where the Chinese are considering bringing forth a bill that would make it a criminal act for countries that are surrounding China to make it an illegal act to target Chinese citizens for gambling services. And of course, we have TikTok. The Chinese have said that they regard what's happened to TikTok as theft, and the telecoms provider Huawei, we have a similar situation where they've been banned, and the UK has decided now to go with Nokia. And so there's tension everywhere. But what we have to remember is that the power of gambling lies with China, because it is the Chinese that send their citizens where they wish them to go. And this was highlighted when the United States introduced a new weapon system to South Korea so it could defend itself better from an attack in the north. And the Chinese immediately reacted by stopping tourism going to South Korea. And you can see quite a substantial fall off there. And they've already clamped down on their citizens wanting to visit Vietnam, Cambodia, and the Philippines to gamble. So that is something we really have to watch going forward. And here we see how China has redirected the pattern of trade in Macau. They've taken the view that VIP gambling is prone to money laundering. They've discouraged it, and they've asked the operators to invest more heavily in mass market and premium mass, and that is the effect there. So this is me going out on a limb. I think within the next 10 years, China will legitimize gambling within their own borders. Going back to 2008, I stood at a KPMG conference in the Isle of Man, and I said I thought that the United States would legalize sports betting, and people thought I'd fallen off my trolley. But in actual fact, as you can see today, it's happened, and it's the growth story of today. Now, the reason why I think China will legalize gambling is because you can't continually criminalize ordinary people's behavior. And the British government discovered that in 1963 when they legalized gambling, and other countries have slowly followed ever since. And it makes sense. It makes sense because your customers are better protected, you can tax the revenue, and it creates a whole new industry. But they're going through the same agonizing process that the United States did. First of all, they're preventing, and there are measures that have been announced today that confirm that. They're preventing payment solutions to the internet. They're disrupting the process of gambling in every which way possible. But after a period of time, they will realize that these measures don't work. And the reason why I say they don't work is because they've never worked in any country in the world. And the Chinese will eventually discover that that is the case. They will then move towards part legalization. And how would they do that? Well, what I would suggest, the best way to do it is through horse racing. China's extremely lucky to have Hong Kong Jockey Club. It's a pristine asset. It produces lots of tax revenue for the government of Hong Kong. It's a well-run business, well-organized, great systems, good horse racing, high levels of security, and I would give them a franchise to run horse racing in China. And there's a lot of benefit in that for the Chinese government because, as you know, the richest 0.5% of people in the world are the owners of horses, and they are the most influential people in the world. And this is a way for China to talk and to influence some of the richest people in the world and the most influential people in the world. And it would have such a significant knock-on effect because as the industry started to buy horses and develop a bloodstock industry, they'd be buying brood mares and yearlings from the UK, from France, from Kentucky, Ireland, Australia. It would have a knock-on effect throughout the world, and it would be certainly something to be welcomed. I think after that, if they opened, say, 10 race courses and they saw that no harm was caused and they developed an industry, particularly a localized industry where those race courses were built, you'd have more hotels, you'd have people going racing at weekends, as we see in UK and France. And it would be a fantastic development. And when they see that no harm has been caused by this, I think they'll move towards fully legalizing gambling. This is not a quick process. This is going to take years. It's going to take at least 10 years, but I am pretty convinced that it's going to happen. So in summary, tensions inevitably will rise between China and the UK, particularly as the Chinese economy starts to grow and equal that of the United States. iGaming will continue to grow. Those that don't have an iGaming solution need one quickly. The land-based recovery is likely to be much slower because people are still nervous about going out. Not all, younger people less so, but they are only a percentage of the population. Regrettably, recessions always equal higher taxation and more regulation. There are going to be wonderful M&A opportunities. Opportunities to expand into new territories. Brazil and India could be very exciting from an e-gaming perspective and a land-based perspective. And me putting my head above the parapet, China to legalize gambling in 10 years. That's me. Thank you. Over to you, Harman.